Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. All right, we are back again, and we have some special guests with us today. We are going to be talking about water quality, and we have two really awesome guys that I have been working with, and they're going to talk to us about some of the more, I guess, broad water quality issues that anyone who has a drain in their house probably has to deal with. And so I'd like to welcome Mike Chiazza and Joe Smith. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Karen and Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
Glad to be here with two awesome guys. It's two awesome guys and Dan. Okay, here we go.
and an awesome lady. Okay.
Sounds like a comedy. Sounds like a sitcom.
All right. So, Mike, would you tell us a little bit about your role in the city of Wheeling?
Sure. So I'm the operations supervisor at the Water Pollution Control Division. We operate a wastewater treatment plant that handles anywhere from, on average, 7 million gallons a day up to 35 million gallons a day.
That's a lot of water.
It is. It's a lot of wastewater.
A lot of wastewater, yeah.
Yep.
And wastewater is the stuff that comes out of your house when you're done with it, for those of you who aren't quite sure. How about you, Joe? What is your role with the city?
I am the stormwater coordinator for the city. I basically take care of the drains, any kind of new pipe going into the ground for the rainwater. To put it real simple, that's any garbage going into the drains. That's what I do.
All right. I am very happy to have you guys here. And Dan, most of the stuff that you and I deal with is farm-related wastewater and some stormwater as well, right?
That's right. We have done programs on runoff from farms and with the usage of fertilizers, manures, but it all gets tied together. And whether you have a farm or not, water is the most precious resource that you have, and it's above any kind of nutrient program that you can do.
That's right. It's our most important nutrient as well. So, I wanted to kind of start from within and work our way without. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the mistakes we make in our homes of what we put down our drains, and then maybe work outward to the yard if we have any runoff from fertilizers and things like that. Maybe talk a little bit about the other things that go down into the drains in our stormwater system, and then talk a little bit more about the broader issues of water quality on a broader scale. So let's get started with the drains in the house. So, Mike, I'll let you handle this one. What are some of the worst things people put down their drains at home?
Oh, that's a good question. The biggest things that we see that cause problems for us are the flushable wipes that they don't break down, so they can end up clogging your sewer lines, and oil and grease from baking, cooking, bacon grease, stuff like that. It all adds up and it'll cause sewer overflows.
So when a sewer overflow happens, what does that really mean for a citizen like me that's living in a community?
It depends on where the blockage is in your line. So if you have a blockage, like say the drain line coming from your house to the main line, your house could back up and you'll have sewage in your basement.
Yum.
Oh yeah. And if you're talking, once all this stuff from, the hundreds of houses in, say, a subdivision, that line could be clogged out there, and then every single house in the subdivision could have a flooded basement, or it could back up and you'll see when it rains, you're not going to have the rainwater go down, so you're going to have general flooding.
So just some grease down the drain or some flushable wipes can really cause some widespread damage in people's homes.
Exactly. I mean, if our sewer lines, they're old. They were built in the 19th century, a lot of them, and you have a lot of root intrusion. Those flushable wipes, rags, they get caught on a root. More stuff comes behind it, more rags, grease. Eventually, it just blocks it.
Wow. We have a drain in our basement that was not plumbed properly. And, my house is over 100 years old. So, of course, everything has settled a little bit. And, of course, there are those old terracotta pipes because that's what they used back in the 19th century. And so I recently had to have a plumber come out, and they actually ran a camera down my drain and out to the street, and you could see where the pipe had shifted. And so there was this little ledge, and that's where stuff was getting caught on. And so if you do use flushable wipes, and I know some people use them because they have some medical issues and need some assistance with things, but we do recommend that you would take them, like have a lidded garbage can in your bathroom with a liner in it, and just put them in there. And, some people use a diaper genie or something like that, but it's really, if you take out the trash relatively frequently, it's not too much of a stinky issue.
Right.
But putting them down the drain is really rough on them.
It is. And there's the companies that make these wipes, they're starting to get a little bit smarter. So some of them actually are flushable, and I really don't want to say that because, people are still going to flush them, but you almost want to do a jar test. Put a supposed flushable wipe in a jar with water, stir it up, shake it, whatever, and see if it breaks down. If it breaks down, you're safe. If it doesn't break down, don't flush it.
So what's the timeline on when you would want to see it to break down?
Oh, a few minutes.
Okay, so not like overnight or a week from now.
No, you want it because as soon as you flush it, depending on where you are in the city, it's coming.
Right. So this sounds like a really great science experiment for a science fair for some students to do. So
Definitely.
If you've got kids listening to the show, here's your science fair idea here. Test different flushable wipes and see which ones actually dissolve.
Yeah, it's almost the same type of test you want to run on your toilet tissue for, if you have a septic tank, because, septic tanks, it doesn't get flushed anywhere except to your tank, so it has to break down.
Right. And so, yeah, that's a really good point because a lot of rural people do have a septic system and a leach field and clogs in that tank. If it doesn't break down, that's an expensive clean out that you're going to have to do. So you have to be really careful what goes down those drains as well.
Right.
Yeah, and since we're talking about septic systems, I want to add a little tidbit here that the septic system is one of the things that the Ohio Department of Ag really started to focus on after the algae bloom in Lake Erie. They started to make sure that the septic systems were up to code, and they did revise the code some to make sure that they're working properly, that you're not getting a lot of runoff. And every time that house passes from one owner to the next, it has to be approved by the health department to make sure that septic system is still up to code. So the septic system is one of those things that they are looking at to improve water quality. Water is so important, whether you're in the city, in the country, or anywhere. It is our most valuable resource, but it's something that is being examined as one of the potential causes for nutrient runoff and algae blooms.
Definitely.
Yeah, and also E. coli contamination. A bad septic system or improper piping or whatever can actually, when we get a big heavy storm, can run over the surface, leach down through the ground a little bit, pick up the E. coli from your tank and your improperly managed system, and run it into the nearby creek that all the kids are playing in, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And especially if you're near like a dog park or something like that, and you don't clean up, that stuff is going straight to the creek.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people are like, oh, why do I have to pick up my dog's poop? It's just going to run into the creek. No one picks up the wild animals' poop. And, well, that's fine, but we have a lot of dogs. Like, Wheeling is like the most dog-loving city I have ever lived in. Everybody has a dog, including me. But if everyone left their leavings and no one picked it up, all that poo and the bacteria that it carries is washing straight into the storm drains, running right down into the creek, and it's just building up that E. coli contamination and can make people sick and can cause algal blooms because poo is manure, which is a lot of nutrients. There's a lot of nutrients and nitrogen in that waste. So it's really important to keep it out of the creeks.
Right. And the difference there, I mean, there is a difference between domesticated animals and then your wild animals, because we buy the dog's store bought food and there's all kinds of stuff in that food.
Yeah.
So it's not just the E. coli, it's the chemicals in that food that goes straight through the dog and out to the ground.
Yeah. And chemicals are an up and coming issue with water pollution. Medicines, especially, you don't absorb everything that you take into your body when you take a pill. Some of it is coming out through your waste, and that's going down your drains. When you flush it, it goes to water pollution control, and they have to try to filter other stuff out. And so a lot of these newer things that we're just becoming aware of, they don't necessarily have the technology to filter them back out. And so as we become aware of new pollutants and new problems with our water quality, it's really important to support funding for those facilities to be able to upgrade, because they can't just like magically say, okay, well, we just turn this button and we're going to filter this new thing out. They need to have the technology and the infrastructure to be able to do that. So support water pollution control, support funding for facilities when they need to be upgraded, because it all comes back to what's coming out of your tap and what you're drinking and what all the livestock and wild animals are drinking as well.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point about we can actually test for opioids and, certain types of drugs. We are actually running a test right now with WVU, and there's also a national that we're running with that tests for COVID. So we've been testing for COVID in the wastewater, and you can see the trend. The actual levels of the virus are dropping as the virus goes away. And we can test for opioids the same way.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, we can test for it. We can't necessarily treat for it, though.
That's interesting to be able to monitor those trends through wastewater.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of value in what you guys do, and I just want to say thank you very much for that dirty job.
Well, someone's got to do it.
That's right. And so let's go back a little bit. And we were talking about creeks and runoff from dog waste. Joe, what are some other things that are impacting our creeks when a big storm comes?
There's all kinds of garbage that I'm seeing, and grass clippings, and my storm drops. I'm seeing anything from your pop bottles and cans to I've found skateboards, and I mean, literally anything you can think of, I've found in there.
All right. So what's a storm drop?
A storm drop is like your curb inlet that takes all the water from when it rains. The water will go down the curbs, and then it'll go right into this curb inlet. Okay. And that's where, and then it's connected to the pipes underground.
So it has sort of like a catch basin in it for you?
Yes.
I bet those fill up fast.
And they do. They range in depths and different things depending on where they're at. So they get filled up with cinders and things like that. So we have to continue to monitor them and clean them out. But the garbage and grass clippings and things like that. I mean, dog poop also. I mean, I see a lot of that in there. There's a lot of things that we need to do to keep them cleaned up. I've started putting guards in front of some of my catch basins and the curb inlets to help combat some of the garbage that's going down in some of the drains.
So now I know that people have said, well, these guards are just going to clog up and then the water's going to stay on the street. But it doesn't matter, because the stuff that's getting caught on the guards would get caught in the trap underneath and it would still back up onto the street, right?
Exactly. And it helps with the water quality. The guards do. Now, they do take some maintenance, but I would rather it be maintenance that we just have to scrape the guard off and get rid of the garbage and the clippings and the leaves in front of it than it be plugged in our line and it end up in our creeks and streams and everything else.
Right. And I think it goes back to the whole out of sight, out of mind. If people don't see the litter and they don't see the grass clippings and everything collecting, then they don't think there's a problem. But when they're starting to see it because it's out on the street level, like I know I always try to clear off the storm drains in my neighborhood, because I know if they're covered with leaves and whatnot, the water won't drain down and the street floods. And so I always try to scrape them off when I'm walking the dog. But I think as people are starting to see how much litter and stuff is collecting on them, they're like, oh, well, this is a problem now, because they can now see that it's a problem. So hopefully we can get people to start changing a couple of their behaviors. But what are some behaviors you'd really like people to change?
I've been putting litter signs up on all of the creek banks throughout Wheeling. Littering is one of the biggest things in my eyes that we need to combat and fix. To me, it is insane because your kids are coming up and seeing this, and it's a vicious cycle. When an adult does it, then the kid's going to do it, and it's just going to continue down the line. This is where we live. We should take pride in what we have and enjoy it. It's beautiful where we live.
I agree. And one of the things I see a lot that I think people don't really consider is a problem is, like you were saying, grass clippings. I'll just dump my grass clippings off the bank, and then, it's not a problem. I'm composting them. Tell us how this causes a problem.
Now, if you want to compost, that's fine. You can compost in your yard. But when you put it over the bank near the stream, and then you put your sticks or your brush on top of it, then it's going to, if we have a heavy rain, it gets washed down in there. It gets to a narrow point in the stream. It's going to cause a backup, just like it would in a storm drain or in a sewer drain. So, and it just causes a problem. Then it's going to cause flooding. So that's the issue with that. You can compost somewhere else or dispose of it a different way than dumping it in the stream banks.
Right. So it's not really composting, it's just putting it out of sight.
Exactly.
You're talking about in heavy rains. Now, heavy rains is something that we're seeing more now than we've ever seen. In fact, the Northwest Agricultural Research Station measured rainfall events that have been greater than 2 inches. So if you're looking at the data from 1982 to 1998, there were only 15. And if you're looking at the data of total rainfall events that are greater than 2 inches at one time, from 99 to 2015, that number's doubled. And I know there's more data that's a little bit more current than 2015, but one of the patterns that we've seen since we started having these large algae blooms, and like the one I referred to in Lake Erie in 14 and multiple ones since then, is that we've seen just larger intensity rain events that normally weren't a problem in the past, but have become a problem now. So, everything you're talking about, littering, grass clippings being washed away, we're seeing that more now than before because of these rain events.
A lot of people don't realize that those streams that are running through your backyard, those are actually for drainage too. They're not just to look nice in your backyard. They're for drainage. And we have a lot of hills around here, and the original designers of a lot of these subdivisions, they had swales cut into the backyards, and a lot of people don't like those swales because their yards look uneven, so they fill those swales in. It makes it harder to manage the stormwater. And then on top of that, communities, especially on the East Coast, are combined sewer systems. So like in Wheeling, we have separate stormwater and separate sanitary in some areas of the city. But in a lot of the areas of the city, it's combined. So you have sanitary and storm mixing together. So when you get blockages in that, you're going to get a mix of storm and sewer water.
Yeah, and we've talked about those before, where it's basically a one big pipe with a bar in the center of it that blocks one side of the water from the other. And it's designed so that when you do have a large rain event, that it can handle it, but then it sloshes over into the poo side, and the poo sloshes back over into the river side, and it all gets mixed up and it becomes really nasty. And so a lot of our communities, especially us older communities that have been around pre-everything,
Right, exactly.
we have these older systems, and we're working on upgrading them. And, like the entire city has been torn up for years as we're trying to upgrade these sewer systems. It's a really long, drawn out, and expensive process. But you, as a normal, everyday citizen, can really make a difference in reducing the costs and expenses that are associated with managing our clean water system. So not using flushable wipes, not putting grease down the drain, not letting your dog's poo wash down the storm drain, not littering or picking up litter every chance you get. keeping your grass clippings contained and not running down the street, pick up your leaves and such, keep them out of the storm drains. And that's going to make a big difference, not only to the water quality, but also to the ability of our pollution control measures to manage that water quality. And it's going to reduce the cost to manage that water quality. So if you're tired of seeing your water bill and your sewer bill go up, try to have some community events to reduce things like litter and grass and things like that that are causing clogs and such that your city has to go back through and clean out. And that's an expensive process.
Exactly.
You can make a difference.
And there's a lot of stuff that if you flush it down the toilet or whatever, it could hamper or inhibit the water pollution control plant. It'll upset the plant. We're an activated sludge plant, which basically we use good bacteria to kill the bad stuff. And if you put, something that's really high or low in pH, it could affect our plant. Too much salt, chlorides. So in the winter, we struggle a little bit because of all the road salt. There's just a lot of things that if you wouldn't drink it or whatever, don't flush it.
Yeah, and we also talk to our farmers when we're doing sanitation efforts. Let's say you have to do a clean breakdown. You discovered some bacteria that you don't want getting on your fresh produce, so you're going to clean the entire inside of your facility with chlorine and chlorine bleach, right? And that's all going to run down into the floor drains. It's a really good idea to contact your local pollution control and let them know, hey, I'm going to be flushing a large amount of chlorine down the drain, just giving you a heads up. And that can help them maybe counteract a little bit of it. Also, pesticides. We don't want pesticides down the drain. Most communities do hazardous waste pickups. I know we have one coming up in this area for Ohio County. September 24th, 2022. But contact your local solid waste authority and ask them, hey, I've got some oil-based paint or I've got some gasoline. How do I get rid of this? It's old and it's kind of watery. It's been sitting in my garage for 8 years. How do I get rid of it? Pouring it down the drain is not the option here. That can really hamper the ability of your facilities to function, and it's going to increase your costs at the tap because it is going to cost more to fix the problem you just added in. So antifreeze, transmission fluid, oil, don't put any of that stuff down the drain. It should be common sense, but don't put that stuff down the drain.
Exactly right.
I want to talk one more thing before we run out of time. And Dan, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about this because we have a lot of phone calls that we get from people who love having a beautiful, thick, luscious lawn. And, there's nothing terribly wrong with a luscious lawn, except for when you use too much herbicides and fertilizers and then it runs off.
Right. So fertilizer is a nutrient like we were talking about. The things that get flushed down as far as manures go, chemical fertilizers, similar nutrients, they cause algae blooms, they cause problems and treatments and all that. So in the state of Ohio, some of the goals that we've set since 2014 was 40% reduction in total phosphorus going into the Western Lake Erie Basin. And there's actually another goal for 45% reduction in phosphorus for everything going into the Ohio River and then further down to the Mississippi River, because that's always a big problem. So I know one of the things that we really advocate for this fertilizer certification that we give is the use of soil testing to figure out exactly what nutrients you need. And we did many trials to see how much nutrients it takes to grow the ideal corn crop. And the ideal corn crop isn't necessarily record-breaking biomass or bushels. It's actually making of the largest profit. So you're balancing what are the nutrients requirements of that crop versus the fertilizer prices. And there is a balance there to figure out what is the most economical gain in that. So one of the things we're trying to reduce is excessive nutrient input, whether it be your lawn or your cornfield, so that you don't get all this waste. One, you're spending money and it's literally getting flushed out of the field into the sewers. So you're literally just flushing money down the toilet. But also it's really bad for the environment. So one of the goals of this program was actually designed to increase economic gains, not necessarily record-breaking yields, but what is the best for your farm as far as an economic standpoint. And one of the things that we're also looking at is lawn management, right? So everybody has a lawn, and a lot of those commercial companies that we've noticed has really reduced their phosphorus load as far as like in their products. So, and a lot of those commercial applicators will do a soil test to see what is actually needed in that field, in that lawn, so that you're not putting things that are just in excess. Because when you put phosphorus and potassium in excess, then it just sits there and builds and builds and builds. And then as we have those large rainfall events, they just get pushed out of the field into the streams, the lakes, the rivers, and they cause these algae blooms. They cause other problems with treatment. So it's just one of the things that we've really trying to do is to reduce that phosphorus load through fertilizer management.
Right. So get your soil tested.
Yeah, I know when I go camping, a lot of the people that go camping, they have the campers, and we have a black tank and a gray tank. The gray tank is for your sinks and showers, basically, and a lot of people have washers and dryers in their camper, and a lot of those detergents have all those nutrients, the phosphorus in it, and then they go and dump that gray water right on the ground.
Yeah, and there are gray water disposal regulations, and they vary for every location. So if you are an RVer and you do dispose of your gray water, it's really important to pay attention to what the local regulations are. And if you're not sure, put it down a drain. I know in our area, that is the regulation. If you have gray water, it is supposed to go down a drain and not into a field. And I know for like when we're talking about food safety, for your hand washing station, again, that gray water can't go into the ground. It has to be collected, and then you have to dispose of it properly. Because if that gray water goes on the ground, all the contaminants you just got off your hands are now going onto your shoes, which you are going to walk around and take all through your produce field. But that is a whole nother topic for a whole nother show. Thanks so much for joining us, Joe and Mike. We appreciated having you on.
It's great being here.
Thanks for having us.
And we will catch everyone next week. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.